Revit is a great design and coordination tool, but it has its fair share of limitations regarding mechanical design and analysis. In this video, we'll explore approaches to complement the software with other tools. The first way to extend Revit's capabilities is by installing plugins. So you can access the Autodesk App Store from Revit. Up here, you will see Autodesk App Store. When you click on it, it opens it on your web browser. So many manufacturers like Daikin and organizations like NBS provide free plugins to aid designers and modelers. Also, you have many free plugins. So I can come here and filter my search to mechanical design and perhaps free apps. So you can find such tools like Ripple, HVAC toolkits, and several other free and paid ones on this platform. So that's one way to extend Revit's native capabilities. The second approach is by using Dynamo and Dynamo Player for design automation. Although these are not our focus in this course, there are several courses on the LinkedIn Learning Library that cover design automation using Dynamo and visual programming. So you can start with Introduction to Dynamo for Revit by Paul F. Obin. But sometimes you want to perform design and engineering tasks with specialist tools like Carrier's Hourly Analysis Program, Train Trace, or countless other tools built on Do2 or Energy Plus simulation engines. So Revit can provide the raw data you need, perhaps as a CSV file or in GBXML format. So for example, we can export some of the schedules we generated earlier. Let's say, for example, this space outdoor schedule that we generated earlier. We can export this to CSV format. So we'll go to File here, and when you have the Revit schedule open, definitely you go to Export, and then you scroll down to Reports, then Schedule. Now you can export this as a CSV file. So you can see the one I exported earlier. You can just override this. So this is one way to extract your raw data from Revit and import into other tools. On the other hand, you can also export Revit 3D views to GBXML. So for example, when I go to the analytical spaces 3D view, which I have here, I can also make sure that I have more data. So I can enable the model categories and even the Revit links, which I've disabled earlier. So this view, I can export it to GBXML. I go to File, again, Export. This time I select GBXML. And now Revit will bring up the Create Analytical Spaces dialog, which will prompt you to choose one of these options. So for example, I'll use conceptual masses and building elements. And now I can export this to .xml. So I can just call this HVAC analysis. And now this has been exported. So when you go to where you have these files, you see that you can now import these to other tools. So you can see the XML file and the CSV file I just exported. Now, on a closing note to this chapter, you might have noticed that the cooling and heating loads calculation workflow has changed in recent Revit versions, and the legacy heating and cooling loads calculation button is no more. So in the older Revit versions, I think from 2021 downwards, you find this heating and cooling loads button, but in recent versions, they've been phased out. So this is intentional as Autodesk aims to integrate updated global standards for systems design and analysis. So the calculations are now a part of the systems analysis, which was the focus of the chapter 1 of this course. So, but if you wish to enable this button in newer Revit versions, then you can do that by accessing revit.ini file. So if you go to the C drive on your PC, then you go to this directory, users, username, app data, roaming, Autodesk, Revit, then your Revit version. You find this revit.ini file. So you can open this in Notepad. Then you scroll down to the miscellaneous header. So for example, I can just search miscellaneous here. And then you will need to add these lines of code depending on what exactly you want to add. So in this case, I added 2 additional lines of code. You see this enable heating and cooling loads equals to 1. I also added enable weather in locations equals to 1. So these 2 lines of code will enable 2 buttons in Revit. So when I go back to Revit, so of course, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you close Revit. So when next you launch Revit, you should be able to see this button. That's one. The first line of code, enable this button. For the second line of code, if you go to locations, you see that it has enabled the weather tab. So those are the two things I can do with that. You can enable from that NIF file. So in reality, I don't recommend that you use this workflow. This is just for demonstration, because if you use this workflow, you most likely generate conflicting results and override what you did with the system analysis workflow, because that runs on Energy Plus simulation engine, unlike this one. So as a mechanical engineer, you can see that you're not confined to using only Revit. However, being able to coordinate with other disciplines in real time within Revit is something you won't get from the specialist tools. So you can always complement one tool's weakness with the strength of another, and that's this video's objective.